Welcome to the Healers Café, conversations on health and healing with Dr. Manon.
So welcome to the Healers Café. And today I have with me Elizabeth Yarnell, who is a board-certified traditional naturopath from Trinity School of Natural Health, who used her own diagnosis of multiple sclerosis as an incentive to find real solutions to improve the lives of people living with autoimmunity or chronic inflammatory issues. She is the director of Fight Food Project and the author of the award-winning cookbook, Glorious One-Pot Meals, a new quick and healthy approach to Dutch oven cooking. She is a patented inventor and an expert in inflammation. And her mission is to bring hope to people suffering from MS and other autoimmune diseases so that they can learn how to successfully manage their health to live a robust and pain-free life. So welcome. And I think that does say how it all started, but is that really how it all started?
That is, it all started for me one night in 1999. It was about 2 weeks before my 30th birthday, and I went to sleep as usual, and I awoke the next morning blind in my right eye. And that's really how it all started. When that happened, my father's a neurologist, so he whisked me away immediately into an MRI, and we could see very clearly the plaques on my brain that were indicative and really classical for MS symptoms. And that's when I learned that 80% of MS symptoms will experience significant disabilities within 10 years of diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So really, my driving force became, I don't want to be in a wheelchair by the time I turn 40.
Yeah. And is that what you were told?
That is what I was told.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about that, because I think that seems to be, many of the patients I see, they come in, rather desperate, saying there's nothing to be done. And so I really feel that it's very important to dispel that. But what did it feel like for you when you were told this?
I agree. I think that is maybe the biggest disservice that our medical community does to people, is to take away their hope for a better future. But the truth is that the medical community is stymied when it comes to autoimmune diseases like MS, and they don't know why they happen or how to really change their course. They just know that what's going to happen if you get one of these autoimmune diagnoses, then basically you're looking at this downhill slide for the rest of your life, and you're going to get more and more and more symptoms and become maybe more and more and more in pain or disabled, and that they can offer you some really toxic treatments for MS. They're pretty much all injectable, basically chemotherapy, and they all have some pretty dire side effects to each of them. Mm-hmm. So, and even when you take these medicinal therapies or these pharmaceutical therapies, they don't really even have good efficacy rates. So you're looking at 20% improvement in this phase 3 clinical trial. Is that even worth it for like liver damage and brain damage and total system shutdown?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think the answer is pretty clear, but I think you raise the point that people don't know. So you were your father was a neurologist, so I mean he knew, because I actually had MS as well. So and I did not have that medical training when this was. I was actually this is before I went to law school. So I had my first optic neuritis signs when I was 23. I have to get my years straight, but I went to an eye doctor because that's all I knew at the time, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, "Oh, it looks like maybe you probably did something with your, your lens, So, and in some sense, it is actually what saved me personally, because I did not hear all the grim possibilities until it came back many years later. right? And but by then I was already a naturopathic doctor. And so I kind of, I had already, this can be dealt with. And anyway, but I don't want to share my story. I want to get into yours here, but it's interesting. So you had a dad who was a neurologist. So at that point, were you like, that was the suggestion, but how did you know that that's not the route you're going to go?
I did go that route for the first couple of years because my father was so insistent that I get on some sort of pharmaceutical regimen because that was his world. And he sent me to all kinds of MS specialists. I flew across the country to see like the guy he felt was like really up on all the latest trials and research. And I did try these therapies and I experienced some pretty horrendous side effects. I had hives all over my body for 3 years. Like a good day was 30 hives and a bad day was 300 hives. And on top of that, by the end, when I finally stopped using this, every time I injected myself with this medication, I would literally have a convulsion, have a seizure. And I was just like, my body is telling me it does not want this. Mm-hmm. If I am starting to seize up before the needle's even withdrawn from my shot site, like this is just, that doesn't even begin to touch on my whole needle phobia issue that I had to every single day deal with when I was injecting myself with these drugs.
Wow. And then,
well, I'll just add this. While I was doing the drug therapies, I was still having MS exacerbations and experiencing new symptoms. So I felt like they weren't even working right.
Mm-hmm. So how is, I'm just curious because often when we have to, try something else, it's very hard. And sometimes family can be a difficult force to contend with, so how did, and it's not ill-intended whatsoever. It's that, if you're taught one thing and, and you're in the latest and the greatest and the most recent studies and the biggest specialist of the single parts, it's very hard to shift out of that going, maybe the system doesn't work. Maybe it's not big enough to understand how the whole body works, right? So
right. Well, I feel that Western medicine is looking in the wrong places. Mm-hmm. They're looking for answers. They have become so myopic where they just can focus on such a small piece of anything. So here's a great example. I broke my foot last weekend and I called up the orthopedic surgeon practice. I need to go see an orthopedist. Well, last year I broke my arm and they're like, oh, well, who do you want to see? And I'm like, well, I want to see the same doctor that I saw when I broke my arm last year. And they say, well, he only sees arms. You have to go to some guy who only sees feet. I'm like, are you kidding?
Yes. Wow. Yeah. That's funny. I had not heard that yet. I know for, a specialist for every single body part, but literally not even for a phenomena, right? It's right. Like,
so literally wow. You become a specialist in bones, but only in bones in one small area of the body.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's anyway, it is interesting because, once you see how myopic a view it is, it's easier to understand how you can go deep, but you can't go wide, right? And it really comes back to, I mean, for me, it was the role of the general practitioner, who technically sees everything. And, at least in Canada, we refer out to specialists if mm-hmm. required, right? And if the whole doesn't work, or not the whole, the GP's ability to see the whole doesn't work. And then you have a chance to see, maybe there's something, all these conditions might be related, or they all come down to inflammation, or, but if you're not trained, even as a GP, to see that, then you know, you're part of the whole system, right? You know,
It's
so
true.
it's very interesting,
It's
which
true. I have
yeah.
another good example to share.
Go ahead.
My uncle passed from scleroderma a
Mhm.
number of years ago. Scleroderma is, of course, another autoimmune disease. And by the time he had been 8 years into his battle and he was nearing the end of his life, and he was in the hospital for the last time, and we went there, he had like a baggie full of prescriptions. He had so many prescriptions, he didn't even know which prescriptions he was on, but he was taking like 30 pills 3 times a day, one from the heart guy, one from the GI guy, one from the scleroderma guy. Nobody's talking to anybody else. Nobody's dealing with him as a whole body. They're just dealing with that one specific aspect of him.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really sad, and then you have to add the, you know, the psychiatrist, because at that point people are usually feeling like terrible, and then they say, ah, now we're going to tie in the mind, you know, and it seems in a very strange order, at least, you know, from my background, it doesn't make any sense to do that, right? You start with the whole, and then you might need to go down certain paths, because there is knowledge to be had that looking at the overall maybe can be
But
helpful, right?
again,
Like,
nobody's looking to the root of the problem. They're just looking at the symptoms. Oh, you have diarrhea? I'm going to
mhm,
send you to the GI specialist. He's going to say you have IBS, and he's going to give you Motrin or something like that.
mhm.
Imotrin, I should say, or something. But he's not going to look at all the meds you're on and say, you know what, maybe this medication is upsetting your stomach. He's
Right.
just going to prescribe you another one to try to mask it.
Yeah. Or even looking at, you know, maybe it's the imbalance in your nervous system. Maybe the autonomic nervous system's not working, and your vagal nerve's not working and feeding back properly, or whatever gut issues that are causing, you know, an inflammatory reaction. I mean, there's so many things that, if you look holistically, make so much more sense, you know, to
Exactly.
yeah.
Even his scleroderma doctor, who's like this world famous specialist in scleroderma. And my uncle says to him, you know, what do you think about diet? And the guy says, I like my scleroderma patients to have some meat on their bones, which my uncle interpreted to mean he should eat half a dozen chocolate donuts every day, a quart of chocolate ice cream every night, hot chocolate every day for I mean, that just basically allowed my uncle to run loose with his worst instincts and
Yeah,
feel like it was sanctioned by his doctor.
right. Well, I did not put that piece together either, but it's true. It's not just that there's, you know, in most medical colleges, nothing to do with nutrition, or 11 hours, you know, but it's also the impact of what is seen as accepted because of the lack of knowledge, right? So that's another good point. So let's go back to you and your dad. So what happened?
So my father is still upset that I am not taking any
Mm,
disease modifying drugs. He does not believe in what I do, even though he's seen the efficacy and he's seen me. I'm here 21 years past diagnosis, and I ski, I dance, I can walk and run. All of you, if you met me on the street, you would not know I had MS, even though the MRI will show you that there are 17 spots of plaque on my brain. So it's not like I don't have MS. I do have MS. But I have learned I look in a different place, because as you yourself said, my training as a naturopath is, if there's inflammation, what is causing it? And how do we get to the root of that? And how do we figure that out so that we don't have to put that Band-Aid on later and try to suppress those effects from that inflammation without even addressing why the inflammation is there in the first place?
mhm. And so you decide to do your own route, the evidence of your transformation. And that's where you realize it's not science. It's, and I don't mean this with any sense of uh, against any religion, but it is a religious belief almost, that it's like, this is the thing that works. And evidence, which is what, science is technically based on, part of it is seeing what you see, right? To see the changes and take that into account. And I have found that sometimes, not with everyone, thankfully, but it is really difficult to move out of your own paradigm belief system, that it's so deeply ingrained.
But beyond that, it's not only just yours in the medical profession, because it's what's taught in medical schools, that you can't believe anything you weren't taught in medical school. And nothing that hasn't had a phase 3 placebo-controlled gold standard trial. And really, the more I learn about the human body, there are so many things that just don't work with a phase 3 placebo-controlled trial with tons of people and everybody getting the same dosage or the same therapies. And in fact, in what I do, which is customized anti-inflammatory diets, there's no universal rules that would apply to everyone anyway. In fact, I've even tested a set of twins and found that their test results were radically different from each other. So, if I could say the right diet for all MS patients is this, this, and this, then I could write a book and get super rich, but that's just not how the human body works.
Mm-hmm. So can you share a little bit the steps you take, the diagnostic steps, and what you're considering for anyone who is listening to this show, and also the doctors who are listening to this show, because I do think in the end, everyone that goes into the healing arts wants to help. And,
I agree.
So I do think that I definitely hold that as the highest level of commitment. And then, training in life definitely has a way of challenging all of that. But so what do you, what are the steps you go through then?
I have a 3-pronged approach. Mm-hmm. First, I take a very detailed health history of my patients to see what are their symptoms of inflammation. Is there inflammation at the root of their symptoms and at the root of their problems? And usually there is, I would say, mostly. And then I have 3 main prongs of my approach. The first, or the centerpiece, is a customized or personalized, scientifically based anti-inflammatory dietary therapy. And the therapy I use is called LEAP, L-E-A-P, and I use the MRT test, the mediator release test, which is a very sophisticated, state-of-the-art food sensitivity test that is only offered by one lab in North America, and that's out of Florida. And that's a single blood draw. So I give my patients a collection kit, they get a local phlebotomist to them, they get a prepaid FedEx mailer, that gets dropped in the mail and ends up at the lab in Florida the next morning, and they run your blood against 170 different items. I think there's like 150 foods and 20 or so chemicals and additives that are in our food supply. And when the test results come back, I spend 2 hours with my patient. We extensively review the test results. We cross-correlate botanical food families with anything that turned up highly reactive. And then together we identify the least inflammatory foods for them to eat. So instead of saying, go home and avoid A, B, and C that turned up high on the test, and then the patient is like, but that's all I eat. What should I be eating? I don't even know how to substitute that. Instead, we find X, Y, and Z, the foods that are the least inflammatory on the test. And those are the foods that we construct their customized diet around.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And have you found that typically, because that reaction is something I've certainly seen, that patients will say, well, that's what I eat. It's like, because that's what you eat, that's where your body has, created inflammation against, or it's because of the leaky gut or whatever. What is your understanding of why that happens?
I don't think that that's universal. And I think that's sometimes that happens. And certainly if you are doing an antibody test and you're looking for antibody creation, then those antibodies will have to have been exposed to that food in the past. But mediators like histamine or cytokines and other mediators in the body don't have to have a previous experience with that food. In fact, when I tested my 6-year-old son, he tested super, super highly reactive to coffee. Well, he had never had coffee.
Hi, this is a small commercial break, and for you to let me know that you're enjoying these conversations, please go, 1, to subscribe to my podcast. Number 2, write a review, because if you write a review on iTunes, more people know about this and I can help spread the work, my work, but the work of everyone else I'm interviewing. And number 3, please sign up to my tips for your healing journey. And you can do that under www.drmanonbolliger.com/tips. Thank you.
So it doesn't really correlate that much on the foods necessarily that you've always eaten or that you've never eaten. It can kind of, I don't know which foods, why the white blood cells, the T cells decide which foods are a threat and which foods are not. But sometimes you're like, but I eat pistachios all the time. How can this be causing these symptoms? Well, partly that's why that's causing those symptoms that you can't tell, because you're eating it all the time. So you're having this low level or maybe even medium or higher level inflammation all the time. You can't tell yourself what's causing that inflammation on top of that. I like to tell my patients, if you're walking around, so if you come to me, you're already hurting, right? If you're walking around 80% inflamed pretty much all the time, and you eat something and it bumps you up to 90% inflamed, you might not even notice. But if we get you down to 10% inflamed and all of a sudden you eat something and you're bumped up to 90% inflamed, you absolutely notice, and you can make that correlation very easily then.
Right. So what would be then the so you're looking at this test, which is a combination of chemicals and foods. Right?
Those are the things that are tested, yes.
Right. And then you said 3-prong approach. So
that's the centerpiece. The second piece is to recognize that when there's chronic inflammation in the body, it does visible damage to the digestive tract. And as you know, 80% or more of our immunity is based in our digestive tract. And complete digestion is really the foundation of all health. So in order to see what's going on in the digestive tract, I use a 24-hour urine collection, and that gets sent off to a lab in North Carolina. They do their analysis. I turn that over to the Food Enzyme Institute in Wisconsin. That was founded by Dr. Loomis. He discovered food enzymes in the 1970s. They come back with a report in clear English that says things like having trouble digesting carbohydrates or proteins or sugars, or maybe too acidic or too alkaline, or maybe electrolytes are out of balance. There's all kinds of things we can see through the urine. We also look for heavy metals that we can't see through the blood. So when we have both of these tests performed in the same time period, it gives me a very holistic picture of that person, even though we're not in the same room together.
Right. Okay. And then the third one.
And then the third part of my approach really has to do with the fact that I really believe, even I would say more and more every day, that hidden parasitic infection is at the root of so much of chronic inflammation. And parasites, let me tell you, if there's something that gets me thrown off listservs and open forums that involve medical professionals, it's mentioning the word parasites. But parasites, I believe, are much more common than we have been led to believe. And they are in so many places, in so many of us. Parasite testing is notorious for false negatives. So I don't even suggest people look and get validation. I put everyone in my practice on an herbal parasite protocol for the first month. We just level the playing field, because if there are parasites there, then there's only so much better you can ever get. You can follow your diet so strictly, you can do all these supplements, you can do all these things, but if there's parasites there and you don't address them directly, they're never going to go away. That's their job, is to find a host and reproduce and populate and live happily ever after. So
yeah, that's one that I'm, from having talked to many naturopaths, it's very hard to prove it by testing. You can do 5, 6, 7 tests at different times, maybe, one time, it will show up, right? And think of the cost of that. That's ridiculous, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe not, because some parasites live in the bowels. And so our typical parasite test is a stool sample or
Mhm.
multiple. But if you have a parasite that lives in the liver, like a liver
Right.
fluke, or in the heart, or in the bloodstream, or in the brain, that's
Mhm.
not going to show up in a stool test.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And
So,
then there are parasites that are submicroscopic, and some
right.
that are so anaerobic that they literally disintegrate when they're exposed to air. So there's all kinds of reasons why parasite testing is unreliable.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what, do you use a single herbal product that you see as useful?
I use a combination of 4 different herbs that
Mhm.
are staggered in terms of dosage over the course of the month. So you kind of start very slowly. So a lot of people feel unnecessarily nervous about herbs because of what we've been told.
Yeah.
And so it allows them to start off literally with like 1 drop, and then they kind of crescendo, and then it goes back down the other side. One of the herbs addresses fully grown adult parasites, another addresses the larvae, another addresses the eggs, and the 4th is specifically a vermicide for worms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I mean, that's interesting. And how many times have you seen a mental emotional correlation to the onset of, well, any chronic disease, but in specifically MS?
So what I see is a huge correlation between bowel dysfunction and autoimmune diseases. And often that's the beginning of a person's health journey. And that has never seems to be something that the MS doctors ask. How are your bowels? When did this start? Oh, you mean kind of your bowels have been bad since you took that trip down to Mexico 4 years ago, and they really haven't been the same since. Nobody is drawing those lines between the dots together. But I really see a huge correlation between, I would say, most autoimmune cases and significant bowel dysfunction, probably from parasitic infection at the root, at the beginning. That's probably how it started. And then it culminates from there.
Right. And but is your experience with people, because you've had quite a bit of experience, have you seen any correlation where it's a triggering event, not necessarily going to Mexico and picking up a worm, but a triggering event that cascades the entire downfall, in which then, because of the autoimmune system, then basically the gut becomes permeable, or you become more susceptible to a parasite? Like, have you ever seen it start? Like, it's a chicken and egg question I'm asking you, but have you, in the people with MS specifically, have you seen that correlation, or not particularly, or what's your experience with that?
Certainly I see that people have traumatic experiences. Do they always lead to MS? And I've heard a lot of theories that, oh, you must have had a terrible childhood experience that would have led to your MS. Myself, I don't have any memory of any experience that could have led that way. I have had many parasites, though, starting when I was 7. Sometimes I feel like when you have parasites and when you're experiencing bowel dysfunction and chronic inflammation all over your body, you are less able to cope with these things. So they become maybe worse than they might need to be in your own mind and in your own life, because they take on a life of their own, because you are not physically strong enough really to handle it and to deal with it and process those emotions, because your body is not in a good state.
Yeah.
But that hasn't been the focus of my research. That's I'm not necessarily probing for those kinds of experiences with my patients. I do follow the research of, I'm going to blank on his name, but he wrote The Inflamed Brain. He is a neuropsychiatrist out of England. Do you know that book?
Yes, I do. I don't, his name is blanking too.
Yes. And so he's super interesting because he's a neurologist and a psychiatrist, and he is the first one I've seen, the first in the medical community to notice the correlation between inflammation and mental health. And I give a lot of lectures on that correlation between inflammation and mental health, and I think there's a huge connection.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I can definitely see it from that perspective, the impact it has for sure. Yeah, I guess in my practice, which is not a specialized practice, you know, I've seen different chronic diseases, but I have, and maybe it's just been my instinct to ask, you know, or because of my own experience, you know, to see if there's a stressor that puts your body into a more susceptible state, you know, and so I think that's been an interest of mine. So again, it's just another focus, and that doesn't mean that there always is, you know, either, you know. So, but I have definitely witnessed that many times, and sometimes in the work I do, it's looking at that then turns things around, right? So,
the human body
all
is
part of the holistic aspect,
right? The human body is an amazing thing.
Absolutely. And you know, and I think the deeper understanding of how unbelievably well we're put together and what impacts us, we're still at the beginning of that. You know, it's like it's as if now looking, because all we did before was look at disease management, and when you look at healing and health, we're in an infancy in a sense. I mean, we've had traditional, you know, medical arts that have been around for a long time, but the more we're able to understand, the more questions we have. At least that's how I'm witnessing, you know, the universe at this stage. So yes. Yeah, so okay, so I'm trying to think what else did we went on a tangent. I've asked you what well, oh yes, one other point that you raise, which so you still have the plaques.
Oh yeah, they're still there.
Yeah.
And I can get an MRI and they're still there. With MS, sometimes they come and go, but mostly once they're there, they usually stay.
Right. And I think that's at least also, I can correlate that in my experience with people. The end product is not what causes. There's no direct causality to the way you're experiencing your body. You know, often we say, aha, we've got this, therefore I can't move my body, therefore I'm going to be in a wheelchair, therefore, you know, it's almost like the image that proves the fact. But you can have that and, as you say, dance, move, whatever. It's not, it doesn't mean the end.
It doesn't mean the end. So I really, in my practice, I combine a lot of science with the holistic kind of art of naturopathy. And I can't deny that you can image my brain and you can see what you see there. It is there. It's not there. So with MS, I don't know. It always depends on where the damage inside the nervous system has been done as to what kinds of manifestations you might have in terms of abilities. So just because I know those plaques are there doesn't mean that I know, like, one plaque is probably towards my optic nerve because optic neuritis is one of my symptoms. But doesn't mean that when I think about it, I have optic neuritis. I don't manifest it myself. Does that make sense? So in my practice, what I see is that when we trigger that inflammation with some external factor, and I really base this off of Dr. Alessio Fasano's 3-part theory of autoimmunity, which says that there is a genetic predisposition toward being hypersensitive, which I think could be or parasites. The second factor, he says, is an environmental trigger, just like gluten is for celiac patients. And the third factor he says is leaky gut. And so all of which, and leaky gut we know is indicative of chronic inflammation, and always accompanies inflammation. So it's really all about inflammation. And what I look at is, well, can we identify those triggers? And if we can identify the trigger for you that causes inflammation in your body, and we take it out of your life, then you won't get that inflammation. And if you don't have the inflammation, then you won't have symptoms. And if you don't have symptoms, are you really sick?
Well, exactly. And I think coming back to the plaque, the reason I raise it is because people will say, well, there's the proof of it, which means that I'm doomed. And I'm looking at the nocebo effect of this, because if you take like disc degeneration, which is, you know, something I look at, you can look at a spine, and if we were to ask 200 people, you know, show me your x-rays, there would be plenty of people where you could see disc degeneration, but there is actually no symptoms that come with it. So, and I was, you know, curious when you say this, and you're an example of it. Yes, it could be in certain areas, etc., but that's not typically what people are told when they see the proof of the scarring or the plaque. It reinforces to them everything that the diagnosis and the prognosis that comes with it, right? And I think what you did is, yeah, sure, it's there, and I was able to, you know, live your life fully, right? It sounds like, you know.
Right. Well, I didn't accept that there was nothing that I could do about this. And I'm like, there's got to be something. Somebody is not figuring this out, and it needs to be figured out. So if we can figure out what is causing this inflammation and make it stop, then that's as good as a cure. Right? I never call it a cure because that would get me in trouble with the medical authorities, but it's as good as a cure because I live symptom free. And so it's like, I don't have MS, except for when I eat the wrong things. Like for me, it might be lettuce.
Lettuce
Will give me MS symptoms.
Yeah.
Very sad.
So, yeah, that's kind of unfortunate.
It's very sad.
Sorry for laughing, but
no, yes, of course.
Yeah,
what could be more innocuous than lettuce?
Yeah, it's interesting.
But,
and what do you think about legumes? Is that because if you follow, it's McDougall diet, I think. There is a lot on. Have you found that to be true of, or it's one of the things, but there's many more?
No, legumes are not universally a problem or even significantly statistically correlated to be with any certain issues. I am not a big fan of kind of fad diets that vilify a whole food group or a whole type of foods. I think it's absolutely unique for each person, and that's what I find when I do the MRT test.
Yeah. Well, I love the idea of the uniqueness to it, because I think, you know, it's the combination of the holistic view and the unique care, because even though we all need the holistic view, we also all need unique therapies that work for our unique way and connection and manifestation of things.
Right. Whenever anybody asks me to give kind of universal recommendations, my most comfortable universal recommendations are really things to avoid. I think you should avoid artificial colors and flavors. I think you should avoid synthetic sugars, substitutes. I think you should avoid things that are made from chemicals and mostly processed foods. You know, so that list is much easier for me to share.
Yeah, definitely. So do you have any last comments you'd like to share before we sign off?
So I really believe that all of health comes down to inflammation. And no matter what your diagnosis is or what your symptoms are, if inflammation is at the root of those problems, then we can work on reducing that inflammation and work on eliminating those symptoms. And that's really the whole thing my practice is all about.
All right. Well, thank you very much for sharing your point of view and all your information. And do you have I think you've left a link or something that people could contact you or
Absolutely. You can always find me at my website at elizabethyarnell.com, or you can go directly and book a complimentary 45-minute naturopathic health assessment with me. And that website is bit.ly/EY assessment, EY assessment. But I'd also love to gift your viewers with another gift. This is a free kickstart to reducing your inflammation. It's a 7-day course. You'll get an email every day for 7 days with different tips on how you can start improving your health by removing inflammatory triggers each day. And to get that URL is bit.ly/EY kickstart.
Okay, and that's in the in what you've sent us to put.
I believe so.
Perfect. Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Manon. It was such a pleasure to join you and chat today.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café with Dr. Manon. For more information, go to drmanonbolliger.com.